Today we're going to jump into some really interesting aspects of Material UI. I'll be customizing the theme object, but it's not what you think. A lot of people get into the palette when they talk about customizing the theme object, and yeah, that's one aspect of the Material UI theme, but there's actually a lot of different objects that can be customized in the Material UI theme. So today I'm going to talk about breakpoints, overrides, shadows, and typography. So we'll dive into each of those four. I actually have a separate article if you'd like to read on customizing the palette, and it goes into that pretty deeply. But today we'll stick with these four, and it's really quite simple to customize the theme object once you have it shown to you. So anyway, I'm just in Code Sandbox here. I've got a pretty basic setup. You'll be able to fork my Code Sandbox, my completed one, and I'll have the link to that in the show notes in the details section. So anyway, I've got it set up a little bit here. We'll dive into the actual theme object code, and we'll live code it, of course, but to save some time, I've just got an object here that I've just called the theme extended object. And in it, it's just a paper component, and that paper component wraps a div, a box, and a container. There's no styling on them yet, other than I've got some margin on the div and the box. The other two things of note are that this component is used simply in our app.js, the JSX, and also I'm using theme provider because I'm passing in, of course, a custom theme, which we're going to build here. So the first thing that I'm going to get into with this custom theme is breakpoints. And so I'll show one more time. So this custom theme here, we're creating it, we're exporting it, and then theme provider is passing it into theme extended. So anything that we do in that custom theme will then be available here in this component. It's really smooth how that all works. So anyway, so we've got this Material UI theme, this custom theme. The first thing we're going to do is breakpoints. So let's actually look at the breakpoints object in the Material UI docs. So there's kind of three different sections to it that are of interest. So there's what they call keys, but you probably recognize these from, let's say, Bootstrap, or really any UI library has these extra small, etc. These are pretty standard. So I can't really think of what world you'd want to change any of these keys, but you potentially could add additional keys. And then the values, these are pretty much a default too across the internet, so to speak. However, you might want to customize these. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set a custom small value. The last set of things is the up, down, between, etc. These are preset functions, and they impact how our custom values are applied. And I'll get into those a little bit more later. But for now, let's actually create our custom values. So we're making our custom theme, and we're going to say breakpoints. And I'm going to adjust the values. And in my experience, interestingly, I actually have to set all the values. If I just set 1 or 2, then none of the others are available. So, like I mentioned, I'm going to set a custom or a different value for small than the internet standard. And finally, we've got our XL. Just leave that at 1920 like the default. So simple as that to create some custom values. So the question is then, how do we use them? Like I said, I'm already getting this custom theme passed in by our theme provider. So these values are just simply available. Anytime that we reference the small breakpoint, then we'll use those values. So I've already got use style set up here. So I'm going to create, let's call it a paper class. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set some breakpoints on here so that our padding is different in different situations. Let's set a default padding of 8. And to access something specific in our theme that we've customized, you simply access that theme object. And it's code sandbox, so it makes me use double quotes. Code Sandbox. Very helpful, gives lots of pop-ups. But anyway, so I'm taking that, I just duplicated it again, and I'm going to say extra small is 4. So let's see if we can see some padding differences in here. Oh, not yet, of course, because naturally I have to actually add that paper class down here in our paper component. Class name, classes.paper. There we go. Now I see a little bit of padding on there. You know what, I'm going to go crazy on it and say, let's set the default at 2, and we'll set down at 16. So I mentioned the functions section. So we've got down. We're using this function down right here. So what that's saying is when we are, so this theme.breakpoints down extra small, when we are below whatever value extra small is, or really when we're below the 300, I should say, when we're within the range of extra small, then we're going to use this padding of 4. When we're within the range of small, then we're going to use, and that goes from 960 down, as we'll see. Then we're going to use whatever padding I've set, 16. So let's see that in action. So you notice once we get past, once we get out of the range of small, it snapped down to a padding of 2. There we go, we're back to our padding of 16. And then we get down into the less than 300 pixel width range, and it's down to a padding of 4. And if you dive into DevTools, you'll be able to see all that and confirm all that. I'll just set that at 8 for now. So let's move on from breakpoints. Let's look at the typography component next. The typography object next. So here in the docs, typography is pretty interesting. There's 2 sections to it. One of the main things that it has is it has these values that you can reference. So you'd say like theme.typography.h1.font weight. That's a way that you can quickly apply these kind of standard font weights that Material UI has in place for an H1. If you just use an H1 element in your JSX, then it's not like these are default values that are applied to it automatically, which is kind of interesting to me. I actually looked at DevTools and confirmed that. I assumed that these would be, but like I checked line height. The line height when you have an H1 is about 1.2, it looked like to me when I was testing it, and the line height in the typography, the default line height, is 1.167. So that's kind of an interesting thing to note. Anyway, so there's those default values for objects, and then there's just another set of default values that you can access and add to up here. So what does it look like in our custom theme? Well, all we need to do is reference the typography object, and then what we could do is we could access these values and change them, customize them, but instead of doing that, I'm actually going to add a div which did not exist in there. I'm going to add a div object, and I'm just going to set font style italic. Something simple. So it's not applied yet, but we'll go into our component and we will apply it in our component. So I'm going to make a class simply called div. And then I'm going to use the spread operator There we go. Whoop. Wasn't helping, and then it helped too much. There we go. And we'll reference our div object that we created. So now I'm going to apply this class down here. And there we go. You can see that it is italicized. It's got that font style on it. And I'm going to move this margin out of inline. And I'll just add it up here. Just a little bit cleaner that way. So that's interesting. We've added a custom object within typography to our theme, and we've used it. And then I'm going to show you also how we use those pre-existing ones. We can access pre-existing values within typography for objects that already were created that aren't necessarily our object, so to speak. So I can take the line height value, the default line height that's in the default button object, and I can just apply it. So there we've got the line height from button, and let's use text transform. From the overline object. And always remember to add your commas, and that just made it a little bit larger. So simple as that to access existing theme values. And so these values, like I said, they're existing. That means that they're not specified in our custom theme, but they're available to you all the time. Whether or not you've got a theme provider specifically listed doesn't matter. If you don't have one of those specifically listed, you can still access these default theme values in your make styles function. So now we've got that in there. Let's take a look at the next customization, which is overrides. Now, overrides was very interesting. If you've ever dealt with the Material UI Global Classes API or Global Style API, I forget exactly how it's called, but it's a very sophisticated system, I found. So what happens is when you use a Material UI component, such as, in this case, we'll do some overriding of the container, then container by default gets some classes applied when the DOM is rendered. So a container is a component in Material UI world or React world, so to speak, but then it gets rendered as elements on the web page. So those elements get classes applied by Material UI, and a lot of the classes will have a naming convention, something like, for the container, let's say, MUI container -root, MUI container -max width small. Those are two values that we'll reference. So anyway, it's that literally MUI container, or whatever your component name is, and then a dash, and then some default class or some class that gets applied based on what props you use. So it's very, very interesting. And in my show note, in my video details section, then I will link to an article that I typed up where it basically goes over this code that we're looking at, but it also goes a little deeper into this specifically and gives a couple more examples just to illustrate what I'm talking about. I want to take a break for a moment, so I want to mention, if you're interested in supporting my channel, then I have an affiliate link in the details section. There's an incredible Udemy course on Material UI, and it is over 40 hours of content. You can try it, and if you don't like it, you can get a full refund, and I think that lasts for 30 days that you can get a refund. And of course, it's Udemy, so if you look down here, they're always running deals. So anyway, if you're interested, I do recommend this course. Check it out. I didn't create the course, but I do get an affiliate commission if you use my link. So anyway, I really appreciate you considering that. Let's move on. Let's keep going with the overrides. So like I mentioned, it is simply MUI container. And these are all pre-existing objects within the overrides object. And so the it'll help you with code completion on accessing some of these names. Now let's update or customize the root class that gets applied. So in the DOM, that would be Material UI container -root. Let's go ahead and set a background color. And and we'll set it to gray, something simple. So you can see, very interestingly, that already got applied. We've literally overridden this default, this MUI container root class that was already being applied in the DOM. Now it's just overridden, and really cool aspect. But let's look at something different. So that's that MUI container dash root class. Let's customize the MUI container dash max width small class. Just for illustration, I will set it to font size 20, even though you're thinking max width small, wouldn't it be a small font size? But I like to make it big just to show that it's working. So no changes yet. Let's see what we got to do. Well, we're just using a container component here. There's no special props that we're passing in. However, if we use the max width prop, so what that prop does is it changes the size of the container. It changes the max width of it, of course. So this is interesting in two ways. First, since we've overridden MUI container dash max width small, then it picked up that override that we did, and so the font size is 20 now. Once again, I recommend you open up DevTools and confirm all this if you take a look at my fork, or my sandbox. So second, this is actually hooking into the override of the breakpoints. And so it's saying, okay, small has a value of 300, so the max width over here is now 300. Pretty cool. All right, let's look at one more thing. Let's look at the shadows. So in Material UI, there is, by default, just like a quick access styling that puts a type of box shadow, I think it is, on your components. So depending on what kind of component it is, you might access that through elevation, which we will here. Let's go ahead and set a value of 6. And on the other classes, like the box component, it's the prop box shadow. But anyway, just in case you didn't see it, I'll pull that off and save it. You see the shadow went away there. Put it back on, you see that shadow's there. So these values, there are 25 values by default in this shadow system that Material UI has by default. So I can go from 0 to 24. They're in an array, so it's 0 index. However, what I want to do is I actually want to take a custom shadow value or add a custom shadow value. So, easy way to do this is to take our custom theme that we've created, access the shadows prop on it, and simply push another value. It's kind of lengthy, so bear with me while I type this out. All that I've done is I've taken the value at the 24 index, which was the darkest value, and I've got some notes here that you can't see. And if I was smarter, I would have copy-pasted this and had it just available. But here we are getting to type it all out. So it's pretty long because they're setting a ton of different props on it, or a ton of different shadow styling on it. So we're almost done here. And if you've ever looked into box shadow, it's pretty interesting how you accomplish different stylings with it. So, especially with this, I recommend that you take a look at DevTools after you apply this. So you'll be able to see how that box shadow is applied. So anyway, here we've just pushed another value. Since it's an array, shadows is an array, we've used push, so that means that it's now at the 25th. It's at the end of the array, so it's at the 25th index. So here's I've broken something. Probably I typed that in wrong. Let's refresh here. Okay. There we go. I didn't actually break anything. It just hadn't picked up that change yet. So I made it pretty significantly darker than the previous darkest value. So now there's 26 items in our array, in our shadow array, and the 26th item, which is at index 25, is just quite a bit darker than the next darkest. So that's a pretty good, quick overview of the Material UI theme object. And and I should mention here, we can look at the shadows values. I could have copied it from right here. And so basically I took this one here and made it just a little bit darker. So anyway, really, really slick system that they have for creating a custom theme. Like I mentioned, most people are interested in the palette. I've got an entire article on that, and I'll mention it in the show notes. But I appreciate your time, and have a good one.